Hey everybody, good evening and welcome to the Friday Night Farm Stream. I'm Stephen Reichert. This is Rowan Ridge Farm, and I am really excited to be able to be having this broadcast to you this evening because it's a little bit of call it a milestone. We hit 1,500 subscribers this week, and it wasn't that long ago that we just crossed the line to 1,000, and we're able to get the channel monetized, and that was all very exciting. And so, you know, things are happening here, and I'm very, very grateful to have all you guys in here tonight. I see we've got a handful of folks already in the chat, and tonight I have something a little bit special planned that I haven't done before, which something I've seen other creators do, and I figured I would give it a whirl and kind of see how you guys like it, see how I liked it, and how it kind of made for some content. And that is the Ask Me Anything AMA. And I got some really fantastic questions here that I am going to go down the list and respond to. If you guys have questions throughout the stream, because I'm going to be a little bit in the, kind of focused on the questions so that we can get through them, because frankly, you guys asked some really difficult questions. So I appreciate you, not giving me any easy softball questions to get away with. You guys make better interviewers than I did. Did you guys have a chance to see the interview that I posted this week with the congressional candidate, Robbie Maru? Guy lives just down the road from me. Heck of a nice guy. We had a really good conversation, and we got to talk a little bit about, obviously, the nuts and bolts of food freedom, which, if you guys care about any of that, which I think most people do that watch this channel, or I hope you do, make sure you check that out. It was good conversation. Wasn't the most riveting or contentious interview. It wasn't like Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz type of interview. We wound up kind of agreeing on a lot of stuff, but we got a chance to kick around some of the nuts and bolts of the independent process for independent candidates getting on the ballot. He's running for the U.S. Congress, and he's from New Hampshire here locally, and his platform is all about food freedom. That was really interesting. But this evening, I'm going to be focused on the questions so that we can get done before like 3 in the morning, because you guys asked really good questions, meaty questions that have a lot to talk about. And so I'm going to be kind of focused on the questions. If you guys have like AMA questions that you really want me to answer and dig into, do me a solid, send me a super chat, even if it's like 99 cents or whatever. And that way it will come to the attention and it will kind of rise to the top, because I see we have a handful of folks in here. I saw Bellino's Bounty, Mike in here. I see Northern Lightfoot. I see Sean. Who all do we have in here? And there are probably more. Looks like we have 8 people, which for right now is kind of that's a big group of folks that are starting out. Also, just full disclosure, I have not eaten anything like in terms of real solid food for the last 48 hours. I'm doing a fast. I'm going to try to go for like 3 or 4 days, which is interesting with managing blood sugar as a type 1 diabetic. But my blood sugar levels have been absolutely phenomenal. A little bit on the low side. So I've been kind of dabbling. You may have seen me juggling the lollipop, the dum-dum, trying to make sure that I have a good place to put that down. And I do have a Yoo-hoo at the ready. It's kind of like a fake fast. It's not like complete water only type of thing. I had some broth just to get a little bit of the electrolytes and minerals in. And, obviously I've got a sugar-free Red Bull here. So that should sustain me throughout the evening. And I'm looking forward to digging into this stuff. We have a wide array of questions. A lot of it is about family and farming and the balance between the two, which are things that I'm always thinking about anyways. And so having a chance to really kind of give you my perspective on things. And I will say up front that some of the things that I'm going to opine about here, and maybe this goes without saying, but I'm going to say it anyways because I like to say stuff. And that is just that there's different perspectives and different takes on things. What I am giving you here is going to be predominantly my opinion and less of a deep dive into the factual assessment. It's more kind of, this is how I see it, this is my impression, because some of this stuff is very, personal, and some of it also is just a matter of opinion. So we got a lot of stuff to cover. I appreciate you guys all being here. If you haven't already done so, like the stream so we get more folks in here, spread the word, subscribe to the channel. Let's make America farmers again. And as soon as I can get into the info for the chat, because I need to make sure that I have all the questions lined out here. It's like a whole paragraph of these questions. Okay. There we go. So I'm not going to rely on the screen. I apologize for cheating, guys, but I'm like 90 and my vision isn't good and I haven't eaten in 2 days. I got all the excuses already. So we're all set to go here. Okay. Question number 1, what is next for the farm, and how do you find a balance between the hogs, the family, your job, and YouTube? Basically, like an entire like series of videos wrapped into one question. So I'll try to be as brief as possible. What's next for the farm? I have a handful of things that I am working on doing, and progress is slow because, as you kind of get to in the second part of that question, I got a lot of irons in the fire. And for me, the central point of why I started farming, and the most important thing to me, is ultimately my family. So the farm is something that kind of grows, or for lack of a better term, metastasizes at some points. And I think it's, as with any kind of small business, it's really easy to get so in the weeds and focused on it that you forget about taking care of yourself and your family. And at the end of the day, the way that I kind of think about things, or what I come back to, is the idea that if I have, like, let's say I'm making a living wage off of the work that I do with my pigs, but I don't have a good relationship with my family, and my kids are resentful and disconnected, and my wife is kind of over it and just wants me to leave off, there's no point in doing any of this stuff, because I think that everything comes down to basics. Whether it's a business that you're running, some of the other questions will kind of touch on this, but it's back to basics, and you got to have your foundation right in order to build on top of that. And in the last stream, I regaled everyone with some of my more spiritual and theological premises, which for me, my foundation is having a right relationship with my family and a good relationship with God, my conscience where it needs to be, and not getting too distracted, which is really, really hard. And YouTube, ironically, is the component that I feel like is the most challenging when it comes to avoiding distraction, because it's very, I mean, the dopamine rush is very real. When I refresh that screen and I see another subscriber, I think right now we're somewhere around 1560, and the last week or two I had a couple of videos that really popped off nicely, and we've been adding more subs. And welcome if you're new here. I really appreciate you guys taking the time, because time is a very valuable currency that you can't get back, and that means a lot to me. And by extension, I want to be really deliberate with the way I'm spending my time. And so much of what we are immersed in, with technology being as present as it is in our lives, time is the real currency that we have to pay attention to, even more so than money and health and other things. The time is really the big thing that I struggle with. And YouTube is really important, because from a business standpoint, there's only so many pork chops that I can sell. But if I am able to share the journey of what I'm doing and my experience doing it with other people on YouTube, that gives me an entire new branch of diversification in terms of income, where I don't have to put everything and get so hyper focused on just making money off of my animals. But it allows me to make money off my animals, certainly, but it also allows me to do other things that keeps my head a little bit out of the weeds, where I can focus on things, including my family and my health, and have a better experience of everything that I'm doing. And so I moved out here to New Hampshire 6 years ago and change, 5 years ago, 5.5 years ago, because I wanted to be able to raise my kids in a way that was similar to the way that I was raised in the 80s. My parents didn't have a farm, we had chickens, and they were always kind of chasing that dream, but they never quite got there to the point of pulling the trigger and doing it. And my kids are a big motivation. And the irony is that my kids are always asking, Daddy, can we play? Can we do this? Can we do that? And it's like, well, no, because you got to learn about work, and finding a balance to make more time for that is something that I'm working on. But I've also learned to develop my own patience a little bit. And when I say learned to develop, I mean I'm learning that I don't have any and I need to develop it. And I'm more consciously aware of this. So, like, including the littles, when I go out to the barn, and they always want to help, even though their help is oftentimes not helpful, because they need to be taught how to help before they can actually help. And I realize that this is the time when you do that. And if you don't do it now, you're not gonna, like, Bluey and Coco Melon are not gonna teach the kids how to carry buckets and why we want to avoid wasting feed when we're getting it out of the grain bin, and how to properly mix it with the whey and feed the pigs and shutting the gates and stuff like that. So either I'm gonna do it or nobody is gonna do it. And so I've been focusing more consciously on really trying to play the long game in what I am doing with my farm, and not just say that, because it's easy to say that on YouTube videos and look at that from an analytical perspective, or write that down on your outline of things to talk about. But that's the difference between the long game and the short game, is saying, okay, I might have to take an extra 15 or 20 minutes to do this part of the chores, but we're going to start making a habit so that 10 years from now, it's already second nature, and we're actually working together, and we have momentum that we built by sacrificing the short term in order to get the long term goal. Similar concept to planting a seed, watching it grow, all that fun stuff, and it comes full circle with farming. In terms of what is next for the farm specifically, I am, like, in terms of the livestock management, I am going to try to start to register my breeding animals and put more attention into registration of animals and really keeping records. Another thing that is very costly in terms of time, but makes a big difference. It kind of separates the sheep from the goats, no pun intended, in terms of breeders, because right now I have good genetics, and now my herd went from being every pig has a name to being there's like 10 of them that look exactly the same, and I can recognize the differences, but I couldn't tell you which one is called which. And at that point, in order to really be able to keep things on the rails, you have to keep meticulous records so that these animals, when you put them together, you get this piglet out of them. This is a good pairing, this is a bad pairing, this one goes to sausage, this one gets sold for higher price because you have proven carcass quality, proven maternal characteristics, etc., that are very desirable. And in order to make that next step as a breeder, I have to make that next step as a breeder. You got to do the early work before you can collect. And so I'm kind of navigating that change. A couple other new things that we have going on. I finally pulled the trigger on a new class that we're going to be offering here at the farm, which is the Piglet Handling and Husbandry 201 class, which, if you go to nhpork.com, my website, all that stuff is linked down below. Sign up for the email list. You'll get emails when we're doing new things like this, or we have piglets for sale, anything that's relevant to somebody who wants to do business with us as a farm. And for that matter, if business opportunities, like if Tractor Supply wanted to sponsor me, or if Merck or any one of those big GlaxoSmithKline, if you want to start giving me any of your pharmaceutical products, hey, hit me up via email. We'll chat. I'm kind of joking. We'll talk about pharmaceutical stuff a little bit later because that comes up. And I know this is like a 20-minute answer to the first question, so bear with me. I'm going to try to distill more of this, but some of these questions are like broad questions, kind of scattergun stuff. And with this new class, the piglet handling and husbandry is a class that I started that is going to be kind of an addition. So right now, we started last fall offering Homestead Pigs 101. This is for somebody who thought to themselves, it would be really cool to raise pigs. I've never done this before. How do I do it? What do I need for fencing? What does this look like? How many do I need to have? What breed is the best, etc. Very, very, very basic beginner. Certainly not necessary for everybody, but some people like to have that validation of taking a class and realizing, oh, okay, yeah, I'm aligned with most of the things I'm seeing and hearing here, and now I can go into this endeavor confidently rather than like, fingers crossed, I hope it works out. And there's different strokes for different folks, all of which are valid. But this course is a 201 instead of a 101, kind of modeling it after the collegiate, I guess, nomenclature, taxonomy, however they kind of arrange those things, where this is kind of like a intro to breeding class where we're not going to be going over so much of the real fine points of selection and genetics, although we'll touch on some of that stuff. And frankly, like, I don't want to overextend myself because I don't know everything that there is to know about breeding and genetics, so I'm not going to put myself out there to offer a class. But for people who are saying, okay, we've raised feeder pigs for a couple of years, now we want to start getting a boy and a girl, and we'll figure out the genetics, and we're not necessarily trying to breed for, to breed to sell more breed stock, but really we just want to kind of add a breeding pair to our homestead. And the big thing that really got me to offer this class is how many people I see online asking about castration for piglets. And every year there's people all over the place. Now, obviously, if you're buying your feeder piglets from a reputable source, you should already have them. They should come to you already cut and weaned and wormed and all that stuff, which is how I sell mine. But some people, maybe they can't find a source that has that kind of operation, or if you're breeding your own and you're looking into breeding your own, you want to know how to take care of that. I've made videos here on the channel that you guys may have seen about castration, but it's really hard to capture it in video. So the sticky wicket is that some of the stuff that I'm going to be talking about in that class offering, it's close to, I have to be careful from a legal standpoint that I am not crossing over into veterinary consultation or services. So everything with this class, students get to observe, ask questions. I will show what I do and explain what I do, but I'm not offering any kind of consultation or any of that for legal purposes. And frankly, I've dabbled with the idea of, like, I could just go around and castrate piglets for other people, but no thanks. I'd rather have people come to me. I'll get the castration done for my piglets that needs to be done anyways. I'll have a little help holding the piglets, and we can share some information together. So more classes like that so that I can help other people get involved and find their own path in this process community of farming. That's one thing. And then I am also going to be looking to get retail cuts in here so that people can physically come here and buy small quantities of pork rather than having to do an entire half or a whole animal, but that they can buy it in smaller increments, which makes it more viable, makes it more available to a lot of folks here locally who maybe aren't ready to commit to an entire pig. Also gets more foot traffic here. And then lastly, there's a couple of things, like you can see I have a handful of irons in the fire. The question is, which is going to be next, which is going to come first. Some of that kind of just depends. I want to do meetup this fall. that we've talked about here, where we can get together, maybe try some of each other's pork. If you guys have pork, you want to bring it, we can set up some smokers at this brewery that I'm going to be working with here, and we get together, hang out. Those of you who drink, you're welcome to it, and smoke a little pork and shoot the breeze and get a chance to meet each other in person and actually have an eyeball to eyeball conversation, which would be really cool. And also involve some of the local community who also, I am told, wants to get a better understanding of like how we do this stuff, so that, you know, you guys can share what you do and I'll share what I do, and we kind of get more people involved in that. So those are some of the new things. What's next for the farm in terms of expenditures? The next big expenditure, if I was gonna like break into my 401k from my job, my other job at the hospital, to do something significant in terms of expenditures, there's two things. Probably getting a road put in up the hill, which that probably doesn't tell you much unless you've been to the farm here. But we have kind of half the property is more or less flat-ish and pasture-ish. The other half is kind of looks like New Hampshire. It's big rocks uphill, and you know, really needs to be accessed by a tractor. The pigs can get up there, but it's hard to keep the pigs up there if I don't have a tractor to bring water and feed and other items up there. So that's kind of the next big expenditure that I have. And also porta huts. Always need porta huts. And guys, I also want to just take a minute. I know we're like right in the middle of things, but thank you guys for taking the time to watch the videos. And if you ever want to support the channel, obviously super chats, memberships, that you've probably noticed that we've been a little bit more active, doing more stuff. The ad revenue is picking up, and we have a little bit. I mean, when I say picking up, I mean going from like 0 to 1. Where I'm certainly not, you know, having yacht parties yet with my pigs and supporters. This is still very, very early days, and I'm trying to be responsible with everything that I'm getting in terms of resources. But just those of you who are like watching videos all the way through, who comment, who hype, who like these little things, it makes a big difference. And I will tell you that when I'm watching a video from somebody whose channel I am a supporter of, somebody who I actually care about watching and supporting what they're doing, I will, like, even if I'm going to sleep, I'll just put the phone face down and let it play, and watch one of their long videos and just let it play out, because I know that the ad revenue is going to accumulate. And I'm not recommending fraud here by any stretch. I would never think of trying to defraud Google. May they live forever. But those little things that help boost us in the algorithm, it costs nothing, but it does make a big difference. Because since I posted a couple of the longer videos, I posted the video last weekend, I think, which was just kind of like the ambient ASMR pigs in the pasture video, which didn't do a ton in terms of traffic, but it got a decent amount of watch time. And same thing with the interview with Congressman or congressional candidate Robbie Maru. Those got a lot more watch time, and I've seen a noticeable increase, again, from like $5 a day to like $10, $12 a day on some of the days where the traffic is high from those videos. So that is very noticeable and something that warms my heart. And obviously I couldn't do it without you guys. So long way to say thank you. All right. Question number 2. When do you think the farm will be a full-time endeavor? Well, that's a great question. And I'm going to be making a dedicated video on the question of why I'm farming in the first place. And I've gotten this question a lot, mostly from people at the hospital, that because when I go into work there, like I come on the channel to talk to my farming buddies about, and we wind up talking about keto diets and, kind of my other job to my farm buddies. And then I go to the hospital and I'm talking to them about pigs. And so everybody at the hospital is like, when are you going to just quit like pretending to be a nurse and actually go and do what you obviously want to do? And everybody's different, but for me, I like having the ability to shift gears. When I am putting in a lot of time working on the farm, I have a rough season farrowing. It's really, really good to know that I don't have to get desperate. And this is one of the challenges of kind of having one source of income and nothing else, because desperation is always like your one bad decision or one bad conversation or one bad uh, farrowing season, depending on what we're talking about, away from being desperate because somebody's got you by the short and curlies. And so being able to say, I'm going to farm and I'm going to kind of balance my time between the hospital and this job. And first of all, I should mention, and I don't know that anybody from the hospital actually watches this channel, but I will say that my boss at the hospital is a fantastic support and has been very, and she's not like into farming and like all about food freedom and driving a Subaru with a no farms no food state bumper sticker on it. She's not like ideologically aligned that I know of, but she's always given me enough room to understand that the hospital is not the priority in my life. When I'm there at the hospital, I'm expected to perform and to be buttoned up and squared away. But she understands that this is the shape of my puzzle piece, and I'm not going to be the person picking up overnight shifts and coming in when somebody, has a flat tire and it's like, oh, call Steven. He's going to come in and be, bedside nurse. Not the guy for that. And there are people who fill that role, and there's people like me, an oddly shaped puzzle piece, who happens to know an unfortunate amount about diabetes. And so that's my specialty. I come in, I do that stuff. And, I'm given the freedom to kind of shift between worlds. And so having that freedom is really good. I've seen people in the small farm space from a marketing standpoint where you can tell that people are behind the eight ball because too much of their financial burden is reliant on their money that's coming in from farm income. And when they have a bad season, or there's a little lack of cash flow because a couple of expenditures overlap, and so you kind of drop down a little bit faster than, because like there's money in farming, certainly. The problem is the cash flow. It's like if you can make $30,000 in a year, that sounds like a lot of money. The problem is you're going to make 15,000 of that at one point, and then a lot of that gets chewed up, and then you're going to have months where you're like, open your wallet and a moth flies out. That you have that too. So the diversity of income streams is really important, and being able to retain that shift both financially, I think, is really helpful because you avoid the desperation most of the time. I mean, you can still get desperate and that still stinks, and people can still, the movie Super Troopers, I believe, what's his name? I forget his first name. Cox, I think is his name. Brian Cox. He says desperation is a stinky. No, it's not Brian Cox. It's the other police chief. If anybody knows this, you can fact check me on this. Not Brian Cox. The other police chief. The guy who played the George's boss at the company where they called him Coco the Gorilla, the T-Bone episode. I don't know if anybody Seinfeld fans in here, but unfortunately, he actually passed away from diabetes. Close the circle. See, everything comes full circle. He said desperation is a stinky cologne, and there's a lot of truth to that, because the more you're like trying to drop the price and please buy my stuff, the harder it is to get people to take notice. But when you have confidence because you have a couple other irons in the fire, there's going to be times when the animals are hot and you put your attention there, and there's going to be other times when it's not. And playing farming as a long game, I think having it someday develop into a full-time occupation would be great. But if that's going to happen, and I want to make very clear because I've been kind of beating around the bush here, but I am totally open to farming being a full-time occupation, but that is not my goal. That would be great if that happens, but I could go for the next however many years God gives me on this earth without making farming my full-time occupation and feel totally satisfied that I had still been able to do a good job without kind of trying to hammer a square peg through a round hole. Because I think for a lot of people, there's this idea of legitimacy that comes with, oh, I'm not just a hobby farmer. I'm not a gentleman farmer. I'm not, pretending. And look, I'm here on YouTube talking about what I'm doing with my glasses that everybody thinks are, totally queer and whatever. And, I don't take myself that seriously. I like to say that I'm like I pretend to be a farmer on YouTube, and some people get the joke and some people may not. Uh, but I don't have to prove anything to anybody in terms of what I'm doing or how. And I think that if I can maintain that separation from it so that I can make a good decision, like if the door is open, yeah, I'll certainly walk through it. You wouldn't have to push me too hard to get me to go into an occupation where I could spend more of my time at home. I love being around my wife. I love being around the house with her, even if we're like working on different ends of the property. It's just nice knowing that you're there and you can come back and talk to your best friend whenever you want to. And it's like, it's always there. And I know like we have the ability to be working and meaningfully engaged with enough distance to where it's not like, oh, you again, where you're like getting underfoot. There's a good balance there when we spend that time together on the farm, working together or working separately. I would love it. But I also, and I know Joel Salatin has made some fairly extensive videos about this, talking about when to pull the trigger. I think you got to know when to pull the trigger and have that judgment to say, now it's time to put the hammer down, not do it too soon, because you can very easily get swamped and then you completely burn out. And once you burn out, it's real hard to get back up and try it again. But if you go slower, you may miss an opportunity or a window to get in, but you still have the ability to take another swing at it if you don't do it fast enough. If you do it too fast and you burn out, you're never going to want to see another animal other than on your plate or in your frying pan again. At least that's how it's been for me in other endeavors that I've done where I was, um, running a small business for myself. Okay. At what number of hogs do you feel your farm will be topped out at? And that is a great question. That number is yet to be determined because right now I'm effectively farming on about 5 of the 10 acres that I have. Of the 10 acres, about 7 are available. Maybe 4 is what I'm using right now, 4 acres. So that is a good question. Right now, I have about 40 pigs in total. Because I'm always a little unsure how to count some of the cut males that are down there, the freezer pigs. And then also I have about 14, 16, 17 females that were new. And some of those are going to undoubtedly go to sausage at some point, depending on how they perform with their first litters, maybe give them a second chance. But right now I'm carrying a decent amount of animals. So what I've noticed since I just had a couple of litters recently and I got a couple more on deck, I think kind of every month or so, every 6 weeks, we should be farrowing, which is nice. I mean, that's a good schedule if I can keep up with the work. On the downside, doing all the work of like caring for the moms and the babies and then cutting everybody and making sure they get shuffled around and moved and everybody's healthy, that takes away some of my time from being able to really put qualitative investment into the process so that like I'm going to have more piglets, but if I'm not able to notch ears, keep records, do registration, I'm also devaluing some of what I'm doing by kind of making that decision. So I have to make decisions based on kind of the time and the availability that I have, and also as my wife and kids are able to help a little bit more. Hear that? Uh, it's gonna change some of the things that we're doing, but right now, I mean, like objectively speaking, just on the available land that I have, raising pigs the way that I want to, I can probably get close to 80. I could probably, if I had the upstairs, if I get that road bulldozed into the side of the hill so that I can get a tractor up there and really use all of the property that I have, I think I can get close to 80. And it will be a crowd, but it won't be unbearable. It's just if I have 80, that needs to be 80 with a throughput. That can't be 80 and then, oh, geez, now what are we going to do? Well, people are buying, I guess I'll hang on to them for another couple of months. That's not going to work with 80 pigs on my property. It needs to be, that would be more of a full-time endeavor if I chose to really put the hammer down and go harder on pork production on my property. Although, as I mentioned earlier, I kind of don't think, I think my wife just, another one of my beloved members here in the chat. Happy to help. And my wife does help a ton, because honestly, if you had any idea how much work goes into making these live streams, and I don't mean my sitting here flapping my gums, I mean the fact that my wife has like both of the toddlers in a headlock, and then has the baby as well in some sort of a sleeper hold in order to make the space happen for these streams. It's pretty impressive. So, and I would lose my marbles and probably be a lot more impatient than I already am, and that's saying something. So thank you, dear. But yeah, the top number, objectively speaking, I think we could probably fit 80, maybe even 100. Again, depending on how tightly we were comfortable packing them in, probably more, because if you go based on the square footage assessment, but I would never want to be running 80 hogs on my property. And this property is not set up to really be a pork production property. It's just not what it's set up for in the size and the scale and being able to, it's not like Dowdle Family Farms where he's got everything you can see. It's flat as a pancake as far as the eye can see, and you can, make everything set up in a grid and drive your tractor back and forth and all that stuff, which again, I know there's downsides. I'm not bagging on him. I'm just saying, when you look at some property, the story kind of writes itself. On this property, it's really good for up to a certain amount of pigs. And I think that long term, I'm going to be somewhere between 20 and 40 animals, depending on where I go along the continuum of volume versus specialty and quality. And there's a lot of decisions that get factored into that, but 20 to 40 is where I think I want to be long term with everything set up. And I will find ways to monetize that number of animals in a way that makes sense, rather than saying I'm going to run 80 pigs on my property and there's just going to be, everything's going to be beat to hell and I'm going to be running all over the place. But damn it, I'm a full-time real farmer. I'm not just a gentleman farmer with a, hobby farm. I'm a real, I don't want to go that route. So that's kind of the short answer for that. But I have not yet hit the number where I'm like I've hit the number of pigs, which is just however many pigs I have on any given day. That's the top number. If it's just like, I'm over this, I need a day off, like, you can hit that number with a much smaller number than the actual carrying capacity of your property. I'll give you an example of this. One of the things that I've noticed, I've recently started feeding my pigs in the morning so that I can, with my newish role at work, I go to get up in the morning. I'm not getting up at the butt crack of dawn like when I was doing 6 to 7 or 7 to 7 at the hospital, and when I was working bedside. Now that I have a more specialized role, I come in a little bit later. There's a little more flexibility. And so I can get up early-ish, but not butt crack of dawn early. I can feed the pigs, and then I go to work. And when I come back in the evening, I can actually spend a little time with my family, and I'm not having to, just like, hey, nice to see you, oh, kiss the baby, and then I'm going to run out and spend, 2 hours in the barn. The other thing that I've noticed from this, because sometimes on my days off, the timing gets a little bit out of whack and I do wind up having to feed at night, in the summertime, feeding with a headlamp in the dark, because either you're going to be staggering around there in the dark, and when you have like, 20 or so 200-pound pigs that are really excited about the prospect of eating food, you're asking for trouble. So you got to have a headlamp. You turn that on, and then you got bugs and gnats and every kind of insect flying into every available orifice. Nose and eyes are really the big ones that come into play here, and it is so irritating, and it is hateful. I did a video last year. I think it was the video about not not burning out, and I had some night footage that I've used as B-roll in a lot of my other videos. And in there, we've been, I'm swatting at bugs, and it was so miserable. And just by moving my feeding time by like 12 hours, and theoretically I could have moved it even by like 3 or 4 hours, just to while the sun is still up, because then you're not having to deal with the just complete onslaught of insects. It completely changes the character of the event. Like, it's so much easier when you don't have bugs flying in your nose and gnats in your eye, because like, that whatever you're doing, even if you're carrying 2 buckets of feed and a gnat goes in your eye, you're like, there's nothing else happening in your world other than, oh shit, this thing is in my eye, get it out, get it out. And you want to drop the buckets, and it's like trying to hold your breath underwater for more than a minute. It just gets it's hard to do that. So yeah, little things like that have been super helpful. And this kind of gets in the next question: are the first moments of your day spent with your pigs or your family? And yeah, so in the morning when I get up, I'm trying to feed early, because pay it forward, and then the evening time when everybody else is awake, because most of the time the kids are asleep. My wife gets up because she's got to get our oldest on the bus, and so she's kind of awake with the little one. The two littles, not the baby, my wife is awake with the baby, and then the two littles, they are still hopefully asleep. We try to keep them asleep, and I'm not saying that we give them Benadryl on a regular basis. What? I said we're not giving them Benadryl. Come on. But yeah, I tiptoe around those little ones. I want to try to keep them asleep, and then that way, sometimes my wife and I, if the little one goes down, then she can come downstairs with me. I'll make my coffee, and that's kind of regardless what else is going on, try to have that little bit of time in the morning together if we can. But since we're always kind of tired, I have to give her a lot of credit and say that, and presumably she would give me some credit here as well. Like, we both know what it's like to be tired all the time. So if we also know that we like to spend time together and just like hang out, like, I enjoy being around her, and it doesn't matter what we're doing. The littlest thing, most insignificant thing, whatever it is, I just enjoy being in her company, and vice versa. At least that's what she's told me. So I'm going with that. So if she's tired, I know that she actually needs to sleep, and if I can let her sleep, I'm going to try to let her sleep, and like morning time, try to get everybody to stay asleep, and then that way in the evening when I come home from work, I'm able to actually have more time and have a little quality time. I usually put the little ones to bed, which ironically, they're much more scared of her than they are of me, which I don't entirely understand, because I think they should be reasonably scared of me. I mean, like, kids are supposed to have some respect for their dad, and they're learning about all that stuff. But I have some time to read to them, and sometimes we'll watch Popeye or something like that, or the Three Stooges. We watch some old TV shows on the YouTubes before we go to bed. Or sometimes it's just, no, you're going to sleep now. Don't ask me any more questions. No, you can't get up and have another drink of water. No, you can't get up and give your mother another kiss goodnight. Like, it's just, what we get them into bed, and then that way, my wife and I have a little bit of time where we can like sit down and watch something together. And we've been watching Mad Men. Nobody asked this question, but I'll share because I feel like talking about it. My wife and I watched Mad Men recently, and I don't know if any of you guys have had a chance to watch this, it's kind of an older show, relatively speaking, maybe 10, 12 years old, with John Hamm, from kind of like mid to 2000 teens, 2010s, about Madison Avenue executives in the world of advertising. And the one thing that we both really liked about the show is the fact that you get to see something that's it's very nostalgic. There's the beauty of what life was like in the 1950s and the 1960s and even 70s, when everybody thought the world was coming unglued because the president was, Kennedy was sent out to pasture, and yeah, liquid lunches and cigarettes. Yeah, there's so much of that stuff, but like we get to enjoy that vicariously, and it's painful to watch where you realize, man, imagine that, where you could go to work and like your wife could just stay home and raise the kids and you could support everybody. Like if you worked hard, you could just make money. And then look what they've done. It's a painful reminder of what has been done to our culture and our society, which ultimately, to kind of circle back to one of the original questions, is the reason why I'm farming, because I don't know if it's ever going to be a full-time job. I don't know if I'm ever going to be able to do any better than just pay for the feed for the animals, but it's a matter of survival. And from a business standpoint, and also from a cultural standpoint, we need to be doing this stuff, because if we don't, we could still survive. We could go to the grocery store, we could feed ourselves and our family with the system what the system provides, but this is dying. This is a dying way of life. And when people let go and say, the hell with it, another piece of it dies. And so as long as I have strength in my body and in my mind to be able to do this, I'm going to do it. And as much as I can, I'm going to encourage other people as realistically as possible, not like peddling dreams, but encourage people and say, yeah, it's hard, but it's necessary. Come do it. Like if you have effort to give, if you don't have purpose, here's a good way to find some purpose. There's living things that rely on you. Come raise some animals. Find a way. Do that, because it's a matter of survival. And if we don't do it, then who will? Next question here. Are you more than just a pig farmer when you're on the ranch? Do you have any more titles? I don't know that I have specific titles when I am here on the farm. Pretty much dad and, nurse, diabetes educator. Of course, in my past, I have some expertise in risk management as a climbing guide, canyoneering. I used to live in Southwest Utah, spitting distance from Zion National Park, and I have been in some very hairy situations doing search and rescue, although the search and rescue is not really the hairiest situations that I have been in. Most of the real gnarly stuff that I've been in prior to kind of moving back east and growing up in my early to mid 30s, most of that's like the search and rescue is mostly, as my wife likes to remind me, and she did actually just a couple hours ago, most of the search and rescue episodes were, Ethel forgot to take her metoprolol and she went on the riverside walk and is like got too excited when a squirrel ran across her path, and now she's having palpitations and she needs somebody to kind of walk her back to the thing so that they can put her on an ambulance, etc. And so that has kind of been my progression there. But the world of climbing has definitely taught me a tremendous amount about risk management and being task focused in an environment where fear and distraction are everywhere. And when there is legitimate danger, and being able to focus what you're doing to complete tasks that are most important, prioritizing the most important thing, doing that, and not allowing your head to spin out of control. Because when you are climbing and you have 1,000 feet of air underneath your butt, you can't be thinking about that 1,000 feet and what's on the other side of that, which is splat and crows picking up your pieces, and maybe some of the park workers coming along with a spatula. But you have to stay focused on, okay, my world is right here and I'm going to do these things and nothing else, and my mind is going to be 100% here and nowhere else. And that kind of focus is really hard to achieve elsewhere. And I mean, I suppose some of the, you know, uh, little guys that wear the loincloths up on top of the mountains and stuff, like they maybe be able to do that through meditation. I couldn't tell you, but what I can tell you is like danger and risk, when you are confronted with those things, it kind of just happens and you don't have to think about how to do that. It just happens and you go into that survival mode. And when you do it enough times, you begin to actually approach it intentionally in a way that has a lot of good benefit. And obviously, yeah, there's risk involved and you are rolling the dice, so you don't want to be stupid. And you can do everything right and still get the chop. That's the important thing. And this applies to everything, including farming. You can practice business, raise your animals well, do all the, appropriate standards of care and maintain all that stuff, and you can still wind up having something that goes wrong and everything goes off the rail. Because at the end of the day, this is because you may agree or disagree, but our life is not our own. We are given certain gifts, we're given callings, we're given abilities, and how we're going to play those things out, how we're going to spend those things, that we get to make those decisions. But at the end of the day, like, we're only really influencing certain pieces on the board. We're not in control. And understanding that and being able to step back from that and recognize, okay, I'm not in control, which takes some pressure off of me because I'm not in control. I'm moving pieces around, but I'm not in charge. And so that's a big thing that's been helpful. All right, let's see. And I'm not ignoring you guys in the chat. I am going to hop back into the chat before too long here, take a little bit of a break, but I want to keep going on the questions that I have here. This is an interesting question. I think Isaac sent me this one. Feed costs keep going up. Will the increased cost of pork create an opportunity for small producers? So there's kind of two ways to look at this. This is one of the ones that I really had to rack my brains about. And then I had to come to the conclusion that I'm just going to give you my opinion. So there's two ways to look at this question, two kind of paths to go down in answering it. And those paths are one, which is kind of from a survivalist, lone wolf, prepper type of scenario. And that's a shorter answer, because if the wheels fall off completely and everything goes tits up, well, I don't know. At that point, it's going to be less about trying to survive as a farm and have opportunity, and it's more going to be about, okay, how long can I keep these other pigs alive while I eat one at a time and put it in, and I think in that vein, it is really important to know how to butcher and slaughter for your own use and have storage methods that are viable. And I think that while this is something I am no expert in, and I may someday, I mean, if I had all the time in the world, I would be slaughtering more of my own animals, doing old-fashioned meat curing and preservation, canning, salting, salt curing, like real basic stuff. But what I would say is a good thing to be able to do is always have a mind towards where the exit ramp is, right? Like, know where the door is to get out, and don't sit with your back to it. Don't paint yourself into a corner. Always be thinking, okay, so what if the worst case scenario happens? Then what? And that's like risk management, because danger is consequences, like how bad is it going to be, times probability. If you have really bad consequences but very low probability, we can operate in that equation, right? And sometimes you can control the consequences. Sometimes you can control the probability, and you have to play with those variables, but always be doing that math, doing that calculus and that equation. Probability times consequences equals danger or risk. And so this holds true in the world of climbing, which is where I learned that maxim. Also holds true in the way that I make decisions about the stuff that I'm doing here on the farm, expansion and contraction. So if things go really poorly, then it's a matter of personal survival. If we're talking about just market fluctuations, but the system more or less remains intact, And I would argue that we have not seen the wheels completely fall off yet. So, um, either way, I think it's a good idea to always have an eye towards the exit ramp, know how long it would take you to get out, and also have contingency plans where you can say, before you get into a stressful situation, when it hits this number or when it reaches this criteria, and I can give you my criteria, but basically, if my animals are not paying for themselves, then I am going to begin eating them. And this is a longer term, down to, obviously prioritizing and eating the last one, the best ones, the breeders, eating them last, and have that eye towards the exit ramp with whatever decisions that you're making. Um, Also, just basically butchering, slaughtering, knowing how to do all those things. Obviously, being off grid and solar stuff, that's cool, but that's like a ton of money if you don't know what you're doing or have money to invest, which I'm not speaking from that standpoint because I certainly don't. I appreciate the super chats, I appreciate the memberships, I appreciate the ad revenue, but we're not quite there. Someday, maybe we will get an off-grid solar thing going on, but not for right now. The other thing I would say is invest in salt and like Prague, what is it, the number one and number two curing salts, canning stuff. Like, invest in infrastructure where, small scale infrastructure supplies that might be hard to get, things like alcohol, bleach, things that you might need if you didn't have a hospital to go to, if you didn't have a grocery store to go to. And then you're going to be, then it's just kind of a crapshoot from that point forward, because, a lot of it's going to depend on variables that we can't even begin to calculate. So the other question, or the other way to look at this question about, as costs go up, what does that mean? Does that create opportunities for small farmers? And I think that from a business standpoint, not like a survivalist standpoint, yeah, absolutely. I believe that it is going to create opportunities because it's a pressure test of what everybody is doing. And the unfortunate, harsh reality of the situation is that a lot of the outcome, if it happens within the next year, a lot of the outcomes, it's already baked into the cake. We're not in a position where you can like be that agile, where you can change and move things, because whatever you're doing right now, that's coming from ingredients that have been baked into the cake 18 months ago, 24 months ago, largely speaking. So I think that from a business standpoint, it's not that different from a lot of small business wisdom or thought process, where you have to be able to manage risk effectively, but survive. And it's like, if you look at the Great Depression, there's people that when things got tough, they were able to kind of downsize but still stay alive. And then staying alive, like that theoretical cockroach that, survives the nuclear apocalypse, but is able to then come back after everything else has been wiped off the map, and still have the ability to put a flag in the ground and say, hey, we're still here. That's a big deal. And that's, in some ways, that's a great opportunity. And I think as we get to that point, the question is being able to operate intentionally and deliberately within that environment, being able to see it as opportunity, looking for opportunity within the panic, because there's a lot of that out there. I've had plenty of it myself. I'm not saying like, oh, I'm some kind of, titan of industry here. What I'm saying is that instead of reacting to the fact that you're losing money because you feel bad about, raising your prices, I think it's a matter of saying, look, here, we want to do business and we want to survive. I'm going to anticipate the need to raise prices 6 months from now. I'm going to raise my prices now and have the uncomfortable conversation, maybe deal with a little bit of a dip in the marketplace. But while everybody else is making short-term gains as a result of, oh, I don't want to raise my prices and piss off my customers, if you're saying, no, you know what, stuff is a lot more expensive, and prices need to go up, do that sooner than later. And then when the real wheels falling off type of impact happens, then you already have your prices set where they've already been. And you're like, yeah, this is kind of the reality that I've been preparing for. And you can operate from a marketing standpoint, at least, from a place of intention and deliberation rather than reactiveness and desperation, where it's like, oh, I just lost my ass because I didn't raise my prices and I've been trying to hang on to the past, which everybody knows is going away. If you can say, hey, you know what? And I'm not great at doing that, frankly. um, I know with COVID, like after COVID, when I started selling piglets, I had no idea what I was supposed to price things at. And I kind of looked around a little bit and there I saw some people selling for like 150 and I was like, okay, that's what I'm selling piglets for. And I remember at that time, there were a lot of, I found out kind of after I started selling for that price and I made that my price point. I remember a lot of other people like losing their marbles because, oh, that's so expensive. How can you do that? And I said, this is my price. Like, either it works or it doesn't. And I didn't have everybody that approached me for the product coming to me and saying, yes, I'll buy. I had a lot of people saying, that's a little steep. Sorry. And that's kind of how I knew that I was in the right spot. It's just like when you're, doing construction, you don't want to get every job that you bid for. If every job that you bid for, you're getting it, then your prices are too low and you need to operate it like a business if you are going to run it as a business. And when in my scenario during the pandemic, initially, when I first started, I was a little bit high. But then as the market forces began to play out, the price of everything came up. And it was like, yeah, I'm here. This is the price that everybody else is just catching up to. I've been here all along because I saw this was going to happen. And the sticker shock is, people aren't shocked by the price because it's like, yeah, I saw this coming and this is what it costs for me to stay in business and to keep producing these products. And then the other side of things in terms of from a business standpoint is diversification and looking at what people need, because there's always money to be made even when things are going poorly and everything's kind of falling apart. It's a matter of being able to diversify and see where the need is, and if you are able to respond and be agile. And I know this is a lot of general stuff, but this is the way that I think about it. How can I be agile and responsive and not get too big, but also be big enough? But I also want to be really careful that I'm not overextending myself, because if things really dry up and I have to like downsize, and I would say that's part of creating or finding opportunity, is being able to say, okay, maybe I have to downsize a large part of my herd, and that feels like taking an L. But on the flip side, if taking a short-term L enables me to stay in the game after other people have completely gone out, in the long run, that is a big opportunity. And moving to diversify what you're doing instead of looking at it like I got to get more pigs and cram more out of, this piece of land. I'm looking at it from a standpoint of, okay, what are the needs that are out there that these people that I'm interacting with that they have? And for a lot of people, getting their own animals, breeding, the hard stuff that other people maybe don't want to do. Even like with this class that I just started to offer, I sent out the first email today, kind of telling my email list, like, hey, we're going to be offering this. It's kind of like breeding 201 or 101, kind of a animal husbandry and care and piglets and castration is involved in this class. So, hey, come check it out, because I know that's a pain point that a lot of other people have. And so I'm trying to find ways to address the pain point and not just get tunnel vision of like, oh, I'm a pig farmer, I sell pigs, I sell pork or whatever. Being able to say, okay, well, what else can I do to add a little bit of diversity? And I can use that to keep myself afloat if one area of the market really craps the bed. And if the wheels completely fall off, well, hey, it's been nice knowing you. There's nothing anybody can do about that. But in the meantime, I think this is starting conversations where people are going to be more locally aware and looking locally for more of their food, as if things play out the way that they're currently looking and going, yeah, I think there's going to be more people locally. But again, a lot of it comes down to being agile and responsive and being able to anticipate what's going to happen so that you're there to receive the people that are coming your way, rather than, oh, there's people over there, let me go over there and try to help them and try to take their money. And, as customers, I don't mean anything nefarious, but just like when you're the kind of getting there as an afterthought versus, hey, I saw this need and I positioned myself so I would be here, and now you guys are here and you need it, I got it, let's do business, right? And but I don't think any of that is really specific to farming. I think certainly being able to use property and forage, and maybe on some level extend the time period that your animals are finishing, so that maybe you're growing them a little bit slower with a little bit more of a cheaper ration, where you're not feeding them really hot feed or really hot grain, and you can use more of the brewer's grain or distiller's grain or the whey or the other byproducts that you can get that are good, but that you can't feed exclusively, and to make that help bring up your bottom line, yeah, so much the better. And I don't know if that answered that question at all, but that's kind of the way that I look at it. There's always going to be opportunity when there's hardship or difficulty. It's just, think about it this way. When we're selecting pigs, I know one of the most important things that I select for from my breeding animals is resilience, hardiness. I mean, the carcass quality is all well and good, but if I have a mama and a pairing that make beautiful carcasses, but the babies keep getting squashed because mama is not very good at kind of taking care of the babies, and the piglets aren't very healthy because they're always getting sick and kicking the bucket, then like they're not making me any money. And so being able to look at it from a business standpoint, where you're saying who's going to be scrappy, who's going to be willing to do what it takes, even if that means kind of going in the opposite direction of what you think or what everybody else is doing, being willing to do that, that's the thing that's going to ultimately pay off in the long run. And there's always opportunities, because whenever the market is taking a dive and whenever somebody is losing their ass, there's somebody else on the other side of that equation. I'm not going to say anything about where they might be from, or, any of their religious affiliations, but there's somebody on the other side of that transaction who's going to be making money while you're losing your shirt, guaranteed. And I don't necessarily have a great way to say, oh, this is how you win, but being resilient and harder to kill, being that cockroach that's harder to squash and step on, that like you step on it and it still like kind of wiggles away and keeps going. That's where I'm aiming to be from a business standpoint, rather than just like, oh, tour de force, I'm going to come in and overwhelm the system that's way bigger than I am, that's rigged against me, that has everything. But if you can get down low enough where they try stomping on you, but you're agile and nimble enough and small enough where you have a low enough profile that they step on you, but you're like lining up in between the treads on their shoes where they cannot step on you, you're a much bigger threat and a much bigger annoyance than, a rat that can just be like, oh, there you are, pop, oh, here's some poison, there you go, right? You don't have that, like, you be small enough to go under where you can survive and then stay alive. I could talk about that one for a little bit more longer, but let's see. All right, I'll be hopping into the chat. I'm down to my last two questions, I believe. Yeah, the last two questions that I'm down to, and then I'll hop into the chat and we'll kind of whittle things down to a close. But these are both very meaty questions, so I don't know how quickly that's going to happen. And if you guys have additional questions that you want me to tag onto this, send a super chat, and I will make sure that I can get the, yeah, if there's super chats and stuff in here. Let's see. Oh, Zeb's in here. Oh, cool. I'm like going back, looking at the history here, so now I know kind of who's been in here, but I've been focused on the question. All right, appreciate your patience with me, guys. This means a lot. It's really cool. So I had an email, and I'm going to do a whole video about this question. because it's kind of a couple questions. It's like a mega question. Do you feed organic? And are you against all pharmaceutical interventions? Basically, it was an email that I got from a lady who was like, look, we want to, we're very concerned about the way meat is being raised and processed, and we want none of that like pharmaceutical nonsense in our meat. And also, do you feed organic? So in terms of the organic, I might ruffle some feathers here because I know some of you guys do feed organic and you're big believers in the non-GMO stuff. um, Number one, I will say I have not fed GMO free and organic, so I cannot do a qualitative A to B comparison. At some point, when I have a YouTube channel that is paying for my feed costs, I would love to do a trial group and take piglets and have one batch of piglets that are sequestered from the rest of the group, feed them non-GMO organic, and then have another group that is fed run-of-the-mill corn, soy. Have a nice day. Track them, do a documentary series. I think I might be describing one of the next film projects I'm going to do, because eventually I need to do this. Now that I'm saying it, I'm like giving myself homework. That's the worst thing and the best thing. I have all these video ideas where it's like, oh, you know what? I want to tell people about this. And then I write it down, and then it's like, oh, now I have that before I can do that. And then it all kind of piles up. But it's good because as the channel grows, as it becomes more prosperous, Lord willing, and with your support and your membership and your watching and suffering through the ads on these live streams, it's going to happen. And it is happening. It has happened. That's how we got to this point where we have over 1,500 subscribers now, and the momentum, the snowball's rolling down the hill. So thank you guys for all that. But that's an experiment I would like to do, A to B comparison, where I can really say experientially this is better, or it's not that better. Generally speaking, my feeling about organic, based on what I know and have seen of the label, is that organic is a label that tells people who don't know anything about farming and animals that your animal was generally treated better than some of the other animals that you might get in the grocery store. The way that your animal was raised more closely aligns with what is portrayed on the butter box in the grocery store than some of the other ones that are raised a little bit differently. And I want to clarify that organic and some of these certifications, I think they have more meaning with different types of animals. I think that with chickens, some of this stuff has a much bigger impact, because if you look at the non-organic way of raising chickens, it's like stuffing these animals in, and the quality of life and the health concerns are palpable. So I'm okay with saying that this is just limited to my experiential window with pigs. And my understanding of the GMOs is that the residuals that people are concerned about typically reside and are retained in organ meat and viscera, the intestines, the guts, all that stuff. Those things, those compounds, are not making their way into the meat, because the meat has a different, it's different types of tissue that retain these types of things. And if you think about it, a lot of what the GMOs, the concerns are, like with the phytoestrogens in soy and etc., those are things that have to do with the endocrine system. And so it's affecting or modulating the glands within the system. And so that's affecting certain types of glandular tissue, not muscular tissue. Not saying that it is better or healthy, but the big thing that I also think about with organic feed is the fact that it creates a premium product. And even just feeding run-of-the-mill regular grains, which I feed something that's not quite organic, but it's very low soy. So it has some of the modulation or mediation of everything that's in there. But even with that, feeding a relatively standard ration, I would say that, I'm already selling a premium product, and I feel very uncomfortable selling people a product that I would not buy myself. That I can say, look, I mean, not this is not something that I'm going to be spending my money on. And with the cost of organic feed, as I have priced it and sourced it, that's kind of where I am at on the organic feed. Now, I am a big believer, obviously, in foraging, in supplementing with like whey, brewer's grain, other types of things. Although I would imagine that a lot of the brewer's grain is probably, GMO laden and unclean from a standpoint of organic assessment. But um, I control the things that I can afford to control, and I do the best that I can with those things. And that's where I'm at. In terms of pharmaceutical intervention, there's a big difference that a lot of kind of outsiders, I think that most of the people that I have spoken to, most of you guys here on the channel, you guys tend to be on the same page as far as I can tell. I haven't gotten pushback in the chat, let me put it that way, when I talk about antibiotics and pharmaceutical treatments. There are some people certainly who believe that pumpkins are a great natural dewormer and skip the ivermectin, please. Pass on that. We're going to do diatomaceous earth and ivermectin and pumpkin seeds. And I'm not into any of that. I don't believe, like, at the end of the day, the pharmaceutical industry has many faults because of the way it is run. But I am sitting here before you right now today speaking because of the pharmaceutical industry, which literally keeps me alive. If I do not inject insulin, I would be deader than a bag of hammers. That's just the way that it is. And because of the fact that there are, guys in lab coats who work for the big companies that we all love to hate, if it wasn't for those people, I would be dead. Like, full stop. And so there is a benefit to pharmaceuticals when they are used correctly, and the same thing goes with antibiotics, dewormers, antiparasitics, etc. And in terms of the pork that I am selling to people, those animals almost never find themselves in a situation where they need antibiotics of any kind. Subtherapeutic antibiotics, meaning antibiotics that are given when there's not something like detrimentally wrong where the animal is at death's door, then I'm going to give them antibiotics. If I got an animal that's suffering, like sometimes I'll have one that, and I know Fear Not Farm is in the chat there, and I'm going to get in and read the chat, and we'll dig through some of this stuff briefly once the questions are done with. But I think you were talking to me about like some thrush or some fungal infection that was going on in one of your pigs. I had a pig that had something like that in one of her feet, and I gave her a couple of doses of, I think it was oxytetracycline, because penicillin doesn't really work for fungal stuff, as far as I can recall off the top of my head. But she went on to do fine. But she was a piglet, she was like 3 months old. And so by the time she actually went to the freezer, she had a couple of litters in her before she went to the freezer as well. So she was like 2 years old. So I am much more willing to give antibiotics and vaccinations even to my breeders, because their central purpose is not to be fed to my customers. Their main purpose is to stay alive and produce babies. Now, I do differentiate between the mRNA newer class of, what would we call it, hormonal therapeutics rather than vaccines technically, because they're not really vaccines. I will not be giving my, any of the modern stuff that is just out, because frankly, when you look at what is going on, and the same thing goes with the RFID ear chips, that's a hard no on that, because I do have some animals that have the RFID tags because of farms that I bought them from, and those because they're purebred and it has all their lineage and information, all that jazz, like already stored on their ear tag. But I am not putting RFID, because basically the RFID sensors or chips that are in the pig's ears, and the cows mostly have these nowadays, but somebody can drive by from the road and open up their computer, and they can scan basically a substantial distance, and they can drive by from the road, and they know how many animals you have, what breed they are, where you got them from. They know everything about your operation just by driving by on the road. And to that I say, hell no, you're not going to be doing that with my animals, with my information. And if you want to know what I'm raising, you can pull up in the driveway and we'll have an eyeball to eyeball, the old fashioned way. And I'm happy to talk about the animals that I have. Obviously, I do it on here literally all the time, but I'm not going to be giving people my information or my animals' information. That's just not really anybody's business. And the government, it's like Ronald Reagan. One of the few things that I agree with Reagan on was I think it's a 9 or 7, I forget. The scariest words in the English language are, I'm from the government and I'm here to help, because no. So when it comes to the vaccinations, I do make a big differentiation between the mRNA stuff and the older, well-established vaccines, and the medical intervention, pharmaceutical interventions predominantly are given to my breeders, because there are reproductive conditions like PRRS. I don't know exactly, I don't remember what that stands for. And there's erysipelas, and my pigs are out there. Sorry, I just hear the pigs fussing. Um, Feed dishes are empty. I think somebody's in heat, and so the boys might be having a little disagreement out there. But anyways, there's a lot of reproductive diseases that I wouldn't bother to vaccinate for or worry about in a feeder pig, because those feeder pigs, they're not going to be reproducing. They're going to somebody's farm. They grow out, they get fat, make some muscle, and off they go to the freezer, and that's that. But when I have a breeding animal, this has happened to me a couple of times, where I bring a breeding animal in from another farm that is very clean, very reputable, no hard feelings, no accusations to make there. But you bring them onto your farm, and when they have their first litter of pigs, they're all mummified. And that is an indication. I believe that one is PRRS, but you have no indication. They're not sneezy, coughy, runny nose, any kind of weird stuff. They're not, there's no malaise. There's no obvious signs of sickness. But when they finally complete the task that you brought them onto your farm to complete, which is making piglets, oh, sorry, I have this condition that, like, now this is a problem. So vaccinating for that, I use FarrowSure Gold, and that is not cheap, but it works. And since I implemented that, and every time I implement a pharmaceutical intervention, it is always a response to a lesson that I learned the hard way. I never use pharmaceuticals to make up for poor management, or at least insofar as I can see. I mean, certainly, yes, if I could concrete over all of my 10 acres and wash everything down with a hose and Clorox every night, that probably would be better management in some ways, according to some people. But the way that I do things, if there's an animal that's suffering, then I try to deal with that in the best way that I can. And if I or my business is suffering, then yeah, I'm going to try to deal with that in the best way that I possibly can. So not all pharmaceutical interventions are bad. Subtherapeutic pharmaceuticals, and the lady asked in the hormone, which I always want to say, oh, bless your heart. When somebody asks me, are you giving your animals hormones? I'm like, I really appreciate the fact. I mean, I was actually just working on the website today, nhpork.com, if any of you want to check out my website and see what I did. But there are like the subtherapeutic, well, if you look at the website, it looks pretty nice. I think I do a pretty decent job. I used to be a photographer, edit some videos. I have a decent creative touch with the stuff. So what I'll do is I'll go on there, and people think they see the website and they're like, oh man, this guy's really got his shit together. And no, I actually, it always kind of makes me laugh when people ask if I'm giving hormones to my animals. I'm like, I don't know where I would buy them, because I don't have a vet to help me purchase them. And the fact that you think that I have enough money and I'm making enough money to where it would be beneficial for me, I'm trying to slow down my animals so they don't grow too fast, because I don't feel like spending the money to get them put in the freezer right yet, because I have breeders that I got to shuffle through. So yeah, no, I'm not big at all on using pharmaceuticals. I will not use pharmaceuticals to mask poor management. But if I have sickness or other issues that can be corrected, and a lot of the thing, that people think when you start off. When I started off, I certainly thought, oh, this is very easy. Why would anybody need any kind of antibiotics? That's a bunch of nonsense. These people are just a bunch of jerks who give their animals antibiotics. But then after a couple of seasons, even with the same management practices, as you add more animals in and they're taking a second, third, fourth lap around the pasture, now the pathogens and the parasites and all the different whatnots, there's a different ecosystem that you're dealing with now that is much more advanced and fleshed out than what you put those first couple of pigs on. So I think the responsiveness to that has to develop, and with time and situationally. And I'm going to hop in the chat because I know I have some questions in there as well. And then the last one, the last question that I was given, and guys, I am going to do more of these AMAs. If you like this, like, let me know, because I'm going to be, I like doing these because it gives me a chance to kind of just rant and, talk about a bunch of different things, because sometimes it's hard to do an entire stream on just like one topic, but you feel obligated to kind of limit your scope to whatever the title is about, because you don't want to put 5 different things in the title and you don't want to be bouncing around. But an AMA kind of allows you to let your hair down a little bit and live. All right. The last question was, have you heard about the Save Our Bacon Act that is part of the 2026 bill? And this is a question that I'm going to also devote its own video to in the not too distant future. So you guys have been around, you've heard me ranting about the Prime Act. Prime Act basically suspends the USDA mandate to open the door for states to say, hey, we have our own regulations and we're going to sell meat within our own state, even if it's not USDA inspected, but we're going to kind of do things locally to help our local food ecosystem. And that's one of the things that I talked about or listened about in my interview with Robbie Maru. If you guys haven't watched that already, go check that out. Hype, like, all that jazz. But it was a good long interview where we talked a little bit about some of those nuts and bolts. Unfortunately, as I see it, Thomas Massie got taken out by the Israel lobby, and so he's not going to be back to Congress in 2027 or for most of 2027. I think he's going to be out in January. And so the Prime Act that he was a co-sponsor of, that got rolled into, or at least a trial version of the Prime Act got rolled into the Farm Bill. And then there is this other act that I got asked about in conjunction with the Prime Act, because at first pass, it kind of sounds like this would be something that goes along with enhancing states' rights. And this is called the Save Our Bacon Act. And the Save Our Bacon Act is basically counteracts state regulations from prohibiting interstate commerce. Let me unpack that a little for you, because it doesn't sound like much when you say that. It sounds like kind of a lot of word salad. Basically, this is a law in response to California and Massachusetts, and I think there's a couple other states that have these specific regulations where they say the state of California will not do business with or accept any goods into our state, into our market, that are not raised up to California standards. Now, I can probably stop there, and most of you understand where I'm going to be going with this, because these bills, Massachusetts has a version of this that, and again, these regulations specifically that are going to be overridden, the state regulations that will be overridden, are animal cruelty allowances based in space and confinement areas. So we might be able to talk about this in terms of, I might have some flexibility on this perspective in terms of chickens, as I mentioned earlier, because chickens do get overcrowded and packed all the way in, and that is unfortunate and horrifying. Same thing goes with veal. So in the pork world, this these regulations are statewide regulations that specifically prohibit the use of farrowing crates. And I'm going to do a video, in my opinion, having never used farrowing crates, but having wished many times that I could. And there's a lot of mixed opinions about farrowing crates. There are some people that are like all for them. There are some people that are totally against them. And I see their value, right? Because these states pass these laws, and these laws within the states, California and Massachusetts, their laws for animal welfare, they are passed by people who hate the idea of eating meat. They are like vegans, PETA, animal rights activists. It's their opportunity to put their oar in the water and make things a little bit harder for people who eat meat, like most of us presumably, and for the farmers that produce that meat that people eat. Now, I think that a stopped clock can be right twice a day. I think PETA is right about certain things, like if we're talking about chickens that are packed butt to gut in these like overstuffed places. However, they are using farrowing crates as the gold standard, that they will not take any animals from any states where they do not have at least, I believe it is 24 square feet per animal in their farrowing operation. So if a piglet was farrowed in an operation where mama was in a gestational crate, those piglets right out, they're not coming into our market. And what we're talking about is predominantly leftish leaning states, well, left leaning states like California. And I probably don't have to tell you about how California were the ones that started the ball rolling on, oh no, we can't have small farmers just going into Tractor Supply and buying penicillin because that's going to create superbugs. And meanwhile, the big farms and the big companies, the big megacorps that were actually responsible for creating antibiotic use on such a scale that it did actually have the possibility of creating superbugs. Oh, they just have vets on staff on retainer. So yeah, they have no problem getting veterinary prescription of medications and then doing whatever they're going to do. And I'm not saying that they were using subtherapeutic antibiotics after this ruling, but the point is California always like steers the ship for where everybody else in the nation is going to be regulated nationally, where they have to go eventually. And so the idea that like California is going to say, oh, we're not going to accept any animals that are raised or farrowed with farrowing crates into our market, that basically cuts off a massive market from a lot of the country and basically allows the states to play an outsized role where they're punching above their weights, and the states are effectively regulating in much the same way that federal laws also punch above their weight and overregulate what is going to be happening in terms of other states, where basically the states are taking on the federal role and usurping that by saying we have a huge market, and so we're going to tell you what can and can't come in here, and thus screw you, and now we get to control the market and how things are done. And on the topic of farrowing crates, you know, the PETA, the People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, where they, I think, were involved in tons of euthanizations and stuff like that. It's groups of people that are largely overweight, middle-aged women with purple and pink hair who hate men, who hate agriculture, who hate meat. Again, I'm generalizing, not all of them, but a lot of them are. And there are people whose approval I do not seek, and I never have, and I never will seek. But I can tell you also that kind of the pushback with the farrowing crates is that, you know, you're talking about, oh, I want to get rid of gestational crates and small gestational environments and give the animals a nice roomy area that they can occupy so they can have their babies in luxury. What that leads to is, if you are not breeding rigorously and selecting for good maternal qualities and good maternal lines, what you're going to get is you're going to get animals that get up and romp and stomp and smash their babies, and then you have a litter with 2 or 3 piglets, and then the next one maybe has 10 or 12, and then the next one maybe has 5, because you just have a tremendous amount of fatalities that are happening to the piglets. And I would argue that that's not very humane or ethical, to have mamas just let to do their farrowing the way they want to do it, with all this room to move around, where the farrowing crates, as I understand them, they are used in the first couple of days, so that when the babies are small and less agile, that you get those first days of colostrum without the babies having to fight to get position. Mama is kind of confined. She can't really move around. Babies get those first couple of days of good nutrition. They get the colostrum, the care that needs to be given through, like if you're raising pigs in a big barn, presumably. I do not give my piglets iron shots, never have. I think maybe once or twice I did, but my piglets have enough access to dirt where they never have needed, in my experience, iron shots. Although I'm kind of curious what would happen, because I bet if I gave my piglets iron shots, I bet it would be like giving them roids, and they would be like stacked, because my piglets grow nicely. Um, at least most of them do, genetics pending. Like I have the genetics pretty much aligned to get them to grow nicely. If I were to give them iron, that would probably be a very benign remedy, or not remedy, but intervention that I could give them that would actually make them healthier and stronger than they are already. And I have not had to give iron up till this point. So, I mean, I think they're doing that, says something about the genetics and the environment in which I'm raising them, that I have pretty good survival rates aside from the moms smashing the babies when they have a rough delivery. So, being able to do the medical care that you need to once they're, postpartum, and mama's confined, so she's not going to bite your leg off, and you can get all the babies, you can mark them, you can say, okay, we have this many boys, we have this many girls, we know what we're dealing with. You can pick up the babies when they're running around, because mama's not able to like savage you when you pick up the baby and she starts squealing, and you can count how many tits they have. Oh, this is a good one. This one has like 14 tits. I'm going to keep this one. We're going to mark this one. She's going to be a breeder. We're going to keep her back specifically for that reason, etc. Right? So there's benefits to restraining the mom's mobility for the first week or so. And then after that point, when the babies are able to move around, there's really diminishing return on keeping the mamas in there. You're better off, and you're going to get better performance, and you don't want to stress them out. And this is one of the things I try to explain to people who who are coming to the food freedom and small farms from a more leftish standpoint. And I know there's some of you folks out there, and God bless, like I appreciate you being here. I've come from a right-leaning standpoint to be more centrist on some things, further right on many others, and then a little bit more left on a few other things as well. So I'm all over the shop. I'm politically homeless and socially homeless. I don't know if that's a thing. Maybe I shouldn't say that. But the point is that people that find their way into this from the food, or from the left, a lot of times they have they don't know a lot about farming and animal husbandry. So I have to tell them about the fact that the big farms, and I'm not a big fan of the big farms. I'm actually really interested in how can we make more medium farms. I mean, the small farms are good because that's where I'm at. That's what I represent. But after the germination of the small farm, what does it grow into? And there needs to be medium farms where we can have like a farm where the farmer could presumably make a full-time living and hire a child or two, or pass it on to the children, and they can hire a couple of people and you employ your community. But you're not Smithfield Pork, where you're owning the farm, the feeders, the farmers. You're owning their children because they have to sell their children into indentured servitude in order to pay for the banknote that you put into getting them their barns and their tractors and stuff like that. The processing, the trucking to and from the processing, all that. Like that huge megacorp, no, that's no good. But medium-sized farms, yeah, we should be encouraging and looking for ways to make more medium farms. Side note. But I kind of ran out of gas there. Let's see. Where was I going? Oh, yeah, but these big mega farms, they're not looking to abuse and torture their animals. They're not a bunch of sadists that sit around and think, oh, can we cram another couple of pigs? They're only cramming pigs in there to the extent that it's profitable. When you have sick animals, when you have dying animals, when you have lame animals, like the ones you see in these animal welfare documentaries that are on Netflix. And look, there's some valid stuff in there. There certainly have been jerks and sadists and psychopaths that get involved in the industry. But I would argue that more of them find their way into the processing and the slaughtering side of things, which is part of the reason why my focus is more on allowing custom processing, where you have a relationship with the one guy and maybe one or two people that work in his shop. And when they're putting your animals down, they're doing it right in front of you. So they're not kicking and abusing and torturing and taking their, frustrations in their life out on your animal. They're right there doing it in front of you and are answerable immediately to you, which is a massive gain in terms of the ethical standards of what we're doing with farming. But anywho, I digress. So yeah, like the big farms, they're not looking to lose money. And so they're only going to do what's going to be profitable and allow them to have healthy animals. And so to that extent, I would argue that the gestational crates and the states that are mandating thou shalt not use gestational crates, they're punching above their weight, and they're throwing emotional bills into the public to muddy the waters, to ultimately harm small farmers, which is part of the reason why I am not. This is one of my big pushbacks. I mentioned this one in my interview with Robbie Maru the other day, that most of you may or may not have seen yet. I know I've seen some of you just briefly kind of following the chat to say that you have, and I appreciate you guys watching that. It's a longer, slower conversation, not like the brain rot editing with the jump cuts. But one of the things that, I think he was a little bit kind of, I pushed back on a little bit, was that the Prime Act is kind of weak, because the Prime Act actually allows states to do stupid stuff, and it opens the door for, like, to get the federal government out of the way, but it also opens the door with the provision for state regulation. And a lot of that state regulation is nonsense. And depending on who's running your state, you're going to have states like Massachusetts, like New York, like, Illinois is potentially another one. But the specific ones that I know in relationship to the Save Our Bacon Act, that is another bill that's baked into the Farm Bill, it allows processors or producers of pork to override the state regulations, and basically makes it so that the companies can't disallow, or that the state can't disallow companies from doing business in their state, because they don't have the same exact ethical regulations that you do in your state. And there's nuance to that, as there is with many things. So, guys, that is the end of the AMA. It is okay. So I'm going to hang out for another 10 minutes or so, kind of wrap this up. I'm going to go through the chat and read some of the questions and commentary and some of that stuff. I really appreciate you guys being patient and being here and participating. And I think we'll probably have a couple more interesting conversations here based on some of what I've seen popping up in the chat. Guys, memberships are open. If you can afford to support what we're doing, you've seen an increase in what we are creating and what we're producing based on the very small increases that we've gotten in terms of watch time, ad revenue, and things that are allowing us to put more muscle behind what we're doing with this channel and diversify what we're offering at Rowan Ridge Farm. If you're not already subscribed, make sure you're subscribed. If you haven't liked the stream already, make sure you do that. And I'm gonna just hop in here briefly. So let's see. If You're Not Farm says, have you ever thought about getting into hunting? Archery would be up your alley with the whole climbing thing. Yeah, I have thought of that. The issue with hunting is like property ownership and like availability. I mean, there are places that you can go in New Hampshire, but because New Hampshire is like the state in New England in terms of the hunting, they're real strict about some things. Like, I would love to hunt moose. I ate moose a decent amount when I lived in Alaska. But here in New Hampshire, it's like an act of God to get a tag to go and hunt moose, because as a hunting state and a rural state here, the people that have land that you can hunt on, there's a lot of competition for it. And there's other people that aren't raising pigs. So I figure, why am I going to go out and haggle with somebody else who really is into hunting and they don't have pigs? I'll let them do that, and maybe I'll barter with some pork, bacon, pig fat, whatever. I'll barter with them to get a little bit of that wild game. But I'm also not a huge fan of wild game other than moose and elk. I've had some alligator in my day, but in terms of like the wild stuff, I kind of prefer the stuff that I grow, frankly, to the stuff that people get off the out of the woods. I'll eat a little bit here and there if I can get some from people. My neighbor is a huge hunter. He has freezers full of stuff, and he travels and hunts and goes all over the place. But if I had more time to devote to it and somebody to give me a nudge and say, "Hey, why don't you come over? We'll go hunting," I probably would get into hunting. I was very into fishing as a young lad. I tied my own flies. I still tie my own flies, and I've been meaning to get out fishing this summer, spring really, which is almost over. So summer now. Yeah, but I love fishing. I do enjoy hunting. Archery is something that I would like to play with because I enjoy shooting. It's kind of expensive, and I always worry that I'm going to aim it wrong and it's going to ricochet off something and go somewhere. I actually have a bunch of round bales that are kind of mulch hay, so I think I'm going to probably at some point reconfigure them and pile them up and make a kind of a backstop out of the hay bales, and then that way I can kind of put some of the bigger caliber weapons that I have to some use, put them through their paces, and remind my neighbor that he doesn't have to hate me because I am a gun hating pride flag Kamala Harris voter. There's plenty of reasons he can hate me because of my chickens and my dogs coming over to his property, but we're cool on the guns and stuff. And actually, I could learn a ton from him, which I hope that eventually we get to have that kind of relationship where we can he can teach me, because there's a ton that I do not know about shooting. Okay. Um, yeah, I see a lot of comments here that are back. I don't know exactly what they are falling into. Um, Fear Not Farms. Well, Bellino's Bounty says at the rate you're going, 2,000 subs is right around the corner. Yeah, I got to figure out what the appropriate interval for doing these AMA, because it's kind of a cheap shot. But I do most of the time, a lot of my topics, unless there's something cooking that's like right at my forefront, I'm going to base what I'm doing my live stream about on what you guys ask me, or things that I'm seeing on YouTube and stuff like that. So I love doing these AMAs if you guys enjoy them. Fear Not Farm weighing in on the non-GMO and the organic. Fear Not Farm says, I can tell you that non-GMO is less effective so far for me. Perhaps I'll do a comparison with my next litter. I think organic is being less chemically involved. For example, soybeans would be fine in my feed if I could confirm that they did not get sprayed with glyphosate. Yeah, I'm with you on that. And unfortunately, that there's like the pragmatic need to look. I got to make money, and I got the bank kind of breathing down my neck. So if I got to spray this stuff on them, I already bought the soybeans, and they work with the glyphosate. That allows me to kind of, plant a couple more fields and not have to worry about a low yield and not have to take that hit, et cetera, et cetera. The buck has to stop somewhere, and that's a question that I don't have a good answer to, other than to say I would have to see a comparison and do a comparison to say this one is better than that one, and I am not 100% sure that glyphosate, in terms of the musculature of the animals that we're eating, so the viscera, the organs, that I could see potentially being compromised, although that is part of the reason why I am feeding a low soy feed, and I'm doing this is kind of my dabbling with the organic lower GMO feeds. If I can reduce the exposure there and feed a low soy feed and supplement the lysine that comes with the soybeans, supplement the lysine through feeding whey to the pigs, then that could potentially be a way to do an end run around that. Um, Bellino's Bounty. Oh, yes, I forgot that you were in veterinary medicine. I'm going to have to pick your brain on this, Mike. Um, Bellino's Bounty says, being in the veterinary field, I can see both sides of the equation, but the context behind it matters. Yeah, I think that's in response to the pharmaceutical interventions, and I completely agree. As an RN in the people medicine field, right? Like there's a lot of people that are like, oh, vaccines are terrible. I will never get a vaccine. Well, it's risk assessment, you know, like there are some vaccines that have been around since the Stone Ages and they're relatively benign. I still choose not to give them to my kids because I don't see that the risk for, let's say, hepatitis B, I think is the one that they want to give. Like my children, bless their heart, they are not IV drug users. They're not engaging in any of the degeneracy that is typically goes around or that is involved and situated with how many people, not all, but most people contract hepatitis B. So yeah, I don't need to give those vaccines to my children, and I won't. But some of it is a matter, like we could almost say it's a matter of style, like from a stylistic standpoint. I think there's plenty of people, well, there's also a lot that we don't know, and that's the other flip side of this too. Because, I mean, why did I get type 1 diabetes? Why is there such a big cluster of people with type 1 diabetes in the Northeast and New England? And it's not all because we're inside and we have hard winters and the vitamin D deficiency and all that. Like, I don't buy that. Um, so yeah, it's hard to say, but it's a matter of risk versus reward. And there's some scenarios where I can see, okay, yeah, it's fair enough. Get a vaccine. Like when I traveled to Africa, I was willing to get some of the vaccines for some of the, again, well established vaccines that were well known and well understood, relatively speaking. I'll take the vaccine. I don't mind. It's okay. Uh, would I do that all the time and for my kids and etc.? Probably not. So there's pros and cons. Um, if you're not farm says, at the end of the day, I like eating milk pork, medium, almost medium rare sometimes. I'm not worming them with pumpkin seeds. Yeah. I do want to use technology on my cattle because I could only increase the productivity of my land at least by double pretty quickly. I do give some consideration to the fact that I know the data will be sold. Would you inform? And I agree with that. Because that's a lot of what this comes down to. It's like if I had all this land and I could be running my pigs every year on untouched virgin soil, yeah, I wouldn't have to give them half of the medications that I do because they wouldn't be exposed to a lot of the pathogens that they are, and I could plant behind them and clean the land out and then till everything in, give it like this long rest period. But when you have 10 acres and only like 4.5, maybe 5 of them, probably 4.5 are really being actively inhabited at this point by the animals, like you have to, you got to work with the constraints that you have, and in order to be productive, yeah, pharmaceuticals are part of that. Yeah, it may be different with your local area, and I know that certain states have different regulations in terms of the RFID chips and the information that you have to put in there. My state does not. New Hampshire, thank God, live free or die. The one thing that they are still doing right, they haven't completely sold out, is the RFID and like all that stuff. They're pretty much like, yeah, do what you want. Now, there are states where they require it. So, like if I buy a breeding animal from Massachusetts, which one of the reasons I have to do some of that stuff. And I mean, I wish I didn't have to take such a paranoid view of all this because it would be nice to be able to have technological advancements working on your behalf where it's like, yeah, I got this chip and I scan it and I boop it and I beep it and I bop it and I flash it and there we go. And it's just like, boom, it's done. It would simplify things a lot, but unfortunately, the way things are, we have to be also conscious of kind of as small producers, what are we going to do, or how much are we opening ourselves up to potential intervention by outside agencies and governing bodies that are not friendly. Um, so yeah, it's an interesting conversation to have. Would you inform buyers if their animal has been given antibiotics? Yes, I would. And the vast majority of my animals, what I always like, the almost the only case, like I have never had a feeder pig who has needed antibiotics in its later part of its life. And I always tell people, like, this is kind of how I deal with my animals. So, like, if they're young, like, for example, one of the things I specifically told the lady in the email who asked me, do you use any antibiotics and yada yada? I said, look, when I'm castrating my piglets, one out of maybe 75 to 100, it's kind of random, will start walking funny afterwards. And for those of you who haven't done your own castration on your piglets, I can tell you that it's very surprising. Like the next day, the pigs should be doing pig stuff. They should be walking around normally. There shouldn't be like any hitch in their get along. And if there is, the first thing that I'm thinking of is tetanus. And that creates toxins in the um, like toxins in the muscles that lead to rigidity and stiffness. And when you start to see that stiffness happening and they're not walking right, you better get them some penicillin and you better do it quick and screw what the government thinks about giving your animals antibiotics. And for that matter, I don't care what my customers think about giving them antibiotics because I'm an animal that's just going to die if I don't give them anything. And most of my customers, to be fair, like don't object to this use of antibiotics because it's what we would do for ourselves or for our own children if they were suffering. But if your pig, you cut them, they get their castration done, and the next day or two you start to see they get a little bit of hitch in their get along, then you give them some penicillin, 2-3 days of that, and they're good to go, and that's it. Occasionally, if I have the misfortune of getting animals coming here in the fall or winter, which has happened a lot this past year, although I didn't actually, this year I didn't need to give antibiotics to any of the piglets that came here. I don't think, but they were breeders anyway, so it's kind of irrelevant. Um, but yeah, I tell people that this is how I do with the animals, and if I am giving them any antibiotics, it's almost always much earlier in their life because my animals, when they're finishing, 99% of the time, 100, yeah, 95% of the time, they're already, into their adult part of their life cycle, and it's summertime. So the hardest part of their life from a health standpoint is going to happen to them when they are little, very small. And then as they get older, which again, I'm not a pork producer as such. I mean, I do have raised some pork, but that's not the main thing that I'm doing. That's kind of a secondary thing. So the animals that are going to the butcher, they're going to the butcher in the summer, to a much lesser extent in the spring, but pretty much summer and fall. So that's the time when the living's good and everything is easy in terms of needing antibiotics. So that's typically I don't need antibiotics for them, but like in the spring or in the winter or even in the fall, depending when the little ones are impacted, yeah, I'll give them antibiotics. And yeah, I tell all my customers that's how I do it because I want to educate people. I want people to understand that when they're saying, "Oh, I'm eating antibiotic free," like don't just stick a label on there and call it good and think you're doing something because that's nonsense. Like if somebody is saying antibiotic free, meaning that they will never give antibiotics to their animals, understand that while that may give you the meal that you desire and that may give you the talking points that you want to put in your bio on Twitter, that is also very inhumane, and you wouldn't do that to your kids and you wouldn't do that to yourself. So why are you going to ask that that be done to your animals? I mean, granted, I understand that hopefully we're not eating any humans here, but all those antibiotics are long since passed out of their system by the time they get to a ripe old age. They're ready to go to the butcher. So yeah. Ear notching. Yeah. I am starting to ear notch. And man, what a confusing system that is. It's like playing the guitar. It's like, learning musical theory about these scales and these chords and the fifth pentatonic, and you go up here in the Phrygian scale and the Stygian scale and the minor and the B and the flat and the A. It's but that is something that I've started to do. So as I am keeping and getting litters out of breeders that I don't personally know, I would say breeding pigs that I don't personally know. Like I don't have, like Gertrude, if Gertrude has a baby, I'm going to know that came from Gertrude because I know what she looks like and I know her babies, and it's going to be like, right? So, but for some of the animals that are like purebreds coming out of a purebred mom and a purebred dad, I need to know whose herds, like whose litters are what. And I need to be able to trace them as I go on to be able to have some continuity in my breeding. Otherwise, if you're not doing that, you're just like rolling the dice every time and hoping that you roll a lucky number. But otherwise, so you got to do that record keeping. But yeah, I've started to notch ears on my breeding animals that I am keeping. I'm not notching ears at this point, although for breeding animals that I'm selling to other people, although as I begin to register and that become like my sales of breeding animals becomes more robust, I am going to start notching ears for other people and get better at reading and interpreting that. All right, let's see. Where are we? Okay, I think we are kind of towards the bottom. Yeah. Bellino's Bounty says, shame of it is tech is too often abused and data is new gold to most. Yeah, it is. And that's true. And I just don't trust the government, and I don't trust the people working for the government, because at the end of the day, like the small farmers, the Amish, are the people that are the last ones to go. I mean, no disrespect to the Amish, because the Amish are amazing. Like if you see their farms, it's just incredible. But these like closed groups of people who make their own communities and just say, nah, we're opting out of the system. These are groups of people that if enough people join those, I mean, like think about Ruby Ridge, you know, the guy at Ruby Ridge, I think Randy Weaver, was that his name? Like they came out there and went to a lot of effort to do some really horrible stuff to his family and his wife and his kid, and all he did was just say, no thanks, I just want to be out here by myself. I mean, give or take, you can say the same thing about Waco. They want to make examples of these people. Same thing with what's his face, Amos Miller, Amos Smith, Amos something or other, the guy with the raw milk in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, that they kicked his doors down, and everybody had some different opinions about it. But like, yeah, there's a suppressive effect on people who want to start farming and producing and taking care of themselves in their own communities when they see that kind of stuff happening. It's a chilling effect. So, yeah. Farrowing crate topic also says, fear not farm. For anyone that would say that it is wicked and evil, have you ever grabbed piglets from a raging mama? Yeah. Or pulled dead piglets out because they've gotten squashed and stepped on, and you have to sit there and say, okay, I have this animal that's threshing around and dying, and I know it'll probably live another 6 to 12 hours if I don't do anything, but it's definitely not going to be okay. So now I have to take it outside and shoot it with a 22 and take its life, or do I just respectfully leave it next to its brethren and let it kind of hang out and go in peace? Like that sucks. Like you don't want to have to make those decisions, and so a farrowing crate can help with that. Yeah. um, Moose regulations are, I mean, whatever, that's not my wheelhouse, but it just seems excessive to me. Fear Not Farm says measles vax seems to me, look at the death rates and sickness, foolish to add guaranteed risks. Yeah, perhaps. I mean, I don't know if I have it. I mean, I think we've more or less removed it to the point where there's not really a big benefit that I can see to doing that. anymore. So, but at the end of the day, I think people should be allowed to, and they have that option presented, and then, there you go. Um, Tetanus is easily treatable if you pay attention. Yeah, agreed. I have it very, very rarely, but when I have it, definitely getting on top of it quick. And I've never lost any piglets to tetanus after castration. And it's very rare, like 1 in 75, maybe 1 in 100. Fear Not Farm says if I advertise no antibiotics ever, it would mean that what I am particularly marketing, I'll treat what needs to be treated. Yeah, I agree with that. And as long as you're transparent and happy to talk about it with customers, I think most of them, they're always like, oh yeah, obviously if it's a piglet and it's suffering, like, hey, give it antibiotics, get it better. They just mean like what most people are thinking of is the subtherapeutic antibiotics, where you're giving antibiotics over a long period of time to mess with the insulin resistance so that they produce more insulin so that they basically become diabetic. Interesting point, and then I'm going to wrap this to a close. One of the doctors that I work with, he's a triathlete and a runner. I think he's a triathlete. I know he's a runner. He does a lot of endurance sports, and he said, "Hey, while I got you here, like, do you have any thoughts about like all of my friends who are, endurance athletes who are popping high on their A1C, which is the measurement that we use to determine kind of the threshold for somebody being a diabetic or not?" And I was like, yes, I actually was just listening to a podcast about this. And what it basically is that a lot of the endurance athletes, they fuel with really carby stuff. So the marathon runner, he weighs, 130 pounds soaking wet. He's going to go and eat like a plate of pasta the night before his race, or the night before he's going trail running with his homies. And then when he's out there, he's got like stingers and like honey stingers or whatever. That's the one that used to be really popular when I was doing some of this stuff. And so you got tons of carbs, and your insulin is having to spike to cover all of these carbs, because as those carbs go into your digestive system, it's insulin that is then taking those sugars and putting them into your muscles, which is where you're getting the energy from that you're carb loading beforehand in order to have. But then what happens is, after years of doing this, even though you're very healthy to look at, these massive blood sugar swings that you are preventing or dealing with, because you're in good shape, you're sensitive to the insulin, but you're still spiking a lot of insulin to, metabolize that huge carb heavy meal. And so then what happens is, as you get a little bit older, your insulin starts to not respond the same way, because your body is kind of over it. And the big carb spikes, it has like an ironic backlash, and that eating fewer carbs is better. So yeah. Anywho, Waco was a cult, but I could also say the same thing about MAGA at this point. Check Tucker's latest interview. Yeah, I saw his, maybe not, if he did one today, I don't think I watched that, but I watched the one from like yesterday, the day before. Yeah, I mean, Waco was a cult, but they could certainly have grabbed Koresh any of the time when he was out, getting ice cream with his family. They could have slapped some handcuffs on him and taken him away, and they didn't have to knock the whole compound down and turn it into a whole thing like they did, almost as though it was a ritualistic sacrifice where they're doing some of that stuff, kind of like what they did in Vegas, with the whole pyramid and the concert goers and the multiple. Anyways, yeah, that stuff is the only reason to overcomplicate something like that, when you could have done something much simpler, is if there is some significance in the way that you're doing it. And the only ones, I mean, when you look at what makes sense, the conspiracy theories are the only things that actually make sense at this point when you really look at the preponderance of evidence. But another topic for another channel that is not mine. Yeah, vaccines there's a lot of them out there. Fear Not Farms is a cool tool that maybe I should lock into my software. Buddy is to do, or let people buy into a particular animal and let them have access and follow it. Yeah, that's a cool idea. I've thought about, my wife keeps telling me that I need to get like these glasses, but I need to get the meta glasses so that I can like live stream from my glasses so people can see more of like the actual day to day of my animals. But that seems like a pain in the butt. I mean, I know it could probably present some opportunity in terms of, um, from a social media standpoint, it would be useful. But here we are. And Fear Not Farm says, lastly, I have seen two types of induced diabetes, ultra skinny and ultra fat. Yeah, their insulin is at the heart of it all, and the way your body produces and or uses. And so you can have a problem on either side of that. Either your body produces so much insulin but doesn't use it efficiently, which typically is your heavy people. Then the other side of things is the where people are not producing insulin, and so they become skinny because their sugar just gets kind of like pissed out through the blood, through the urine, and you're not able to gain any weight, and then you realize it after the fact. Anyhow, folks, I think we're at the south end of the levee here. I really appreciate you guys taking the time to come by here, watch, and interact, be part of this. I appreciate the questions. I got some really good and thoughtful questions, and I'll let you know when we'll do the next AMA. I always enjoy the questions, always enjoy and appreciate the support that I get from you guys. So thank you for just participating and being around for this long, because that watch time makes a huge difference. And guys, if you haven't already done so, like the stream, subscribe to the channel, join us so that you can come along with us for more of our future endeavors. Channel members, you guys rock. From the light that is making me visible here on the channel to the little revenue that we're getting from you guys, it makes a big difference. Moral support goes a long way when it comes to this stuff. Morale, huge, 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 makes a big difference. So I thank my channel members. I don't know if we have any new channel members, so I can't shout you out right now, but I know that the 7 or 8 of you guys and gals that are here helping us to make this content, I really appreciate it. I hope that you're noticing and liking the direction that we're going as we're trying to put more stuff out. I'm not necessarily trying to make everything as beautifully edited and as, the brain rot jump cuts every 10 seconds, 5 seconds. Well, 10 seconds is kind of a long clip actually, but yeah. Yeah, Stephen Paddock was definitely a patsy. Sorry to interject that into the midst of my sign off, but yeah, 100%. Like, he was a patsy. That whole thing just stunk. And the guy that ran that whole operation, he's the same one who wound up going to Hawaii, and surprise, he's the one who was in charge of all of the investigation of the missing kids and everything that was out there, and like the weird situation where they had that fire in Hawaii where only the houses with the red roofs got burnt, but the handful of houses that had blue tops to them, those magically survived, totally intact, just like, everything around them in like this massive radius completely burned to shit. But the houses that had the blue roofs, somehow they made it. It's incredible, how that stuff happens, just, weird things. But it was the same guy who ran that investigation piss poorly and not nearly rigorously enough, I should say, to be more specific. He was the same guy who ran the whole thing in Vegas, and I remember there was the one thing, and I've seen a lot of stuff about this, but there was the one thing where somebody's like asking him something. I think he was the police chief in Vegas during the shooting. Then he went out to Hawaii for that, to become police chief out there. There was something behind him where there were some feds behind him where they said something to him like, don't tell him anything, when he was saying something, or when somebody was asking him a question, and then he kind of clammed up really quick. Like, the guys, you can read their lips when they're talking about it. It's like the whole thing is just, it's a crock. It's a crock, unfortunately. But yeah, Stephen Paddock was a scam. But anywho, on that note, we have more videos coming out, stuff that's going to be going on. So make sure you like, subscribe. And guys, look, I know channel membership and super chats, like, giving money and subscribing or like financial contributions are not in everybody's wheelhouse. I watch a ton of content that I don't pay anything towards that channel or support financially. But one thing I can tell you that I can do and that I will do for every channel that I watch is that if you put out a video and I'm watching and it's monetized, I will watch the ads all the way through, as much as it pains me, because I have kind of that reflex that's like, oh, there's an ad, skip, like as soon as you can. But I will watch it all the way through to make sure that you're getting a little more watch time, you're getting a little better, to improve the AdSense, kind of grease the wheels. And so for you guys, if you watch the longer videos, watch the playlist that I put all the videos on, like when you're going to sleep, just click it on. If you're not listening to something else that's actually interesting, click it on and let it roll. That helps the channel immensely. It makes a big difference. And I could not be here doing what I'm doing if it was not for you guys who, so with what you guys are doing to support it. So again, folks, I'm going to sign off. I will watch that interview with Tucker. Thank you, Fear Not Farm. I appreciate you, the recommendation. I watch a lot of his interviews, and I've watched the Ted Cruz interview a few times over. I just love to see somebody, you watch him sweat and it's so greasy. He's greasy. When you see Ted Cruz sitting there under the bright lights having to explain about how he wants to go and bomb Iran, but he can't even tell you like the demographic makeup of the population and who's going to be affected by this, and he starts sweating and stuttering and like, oh, you're an anti-Semite. And it's like, Ted Cruz, right up yours, buddy. And it's nice to watch Tucker. I mean, even if Tucker is a Fed himself, I'm just on a superficial level. I've watched that interview that he did with Ted Cruz about a year ago. I think it was last June, something like that. I've watched that more than a couple of times, and I always enjoy it. Always watch it all the way through. Always enjoy it. So anyways, yes. Oh, I do get it. I do get it. So yeah, appreciate you guys. Thank you so much. And of course, as always, my greatest thanks to my darling and beautiful wife, Myra, for tolerating, helping, and enabling these live streams so that we can do them and have these streams in here together. So guys, we will see you next week for another live stream. In the meantime, I will be putting out more videos. I'm not sure which one's coming next because I got like 6 or 7 of them in the can that need to get cut up and put together. So I'll be doing some of that probably this weekend as well. So thanks, guys. See you later. Oh, yeah, Oklahoma City. There was another book with the OKC. I forgot what it was called, but it was back in the day. Like I've been, yeah, there's a lot there. So, all right. Good night.